How do agricultural pesticides become air pollution and indirectly affect human health? But first, we need to ask, what are agricultural pesticides? A pesticide is any substance intended for preventing, repelling, or mitigating any pest. Therefore, agricultural pesticides are those substances used by farmers to prevent pests from damaging crops, such as aphids and dandelions. There are 6 main categories of pesticides. 1. Insecticides such as bug sprays and powders. 2. Herbicides such as weed and lawn care products. 3. Fungicides such as certain seed coat treatments. 4. Rodenticides such as rat-bait poisons. 5. Disinfectants. And 6. Wood preservatives. In addition, there are 5 main formulations of pesticides: dust and powders, aerosol sprays, wettable powder, liquid concentrates, and granular. One example, in Canada, the use of pesticides on wheat prevents a potential loss of about 50% of an $11 billion market. Pesticides also benefit meat production such as cattle, pork, and chicken from the food they eat like alfalfa. Overall, pesticide use protects Canada's more than $100 billion annual gross domestic product. So what's the problem? Well, of the formulations mentioned, each can become airborne and pollute the air, as well as travel long distances from application site. This can have many unintended consequences. When pesticides become airborne, this phenomenon is called drift. This pollution can travel many kilometers, become circumpolar, and settle on unintended locations, like bodies of water, homes, parks, and school grounds. But that is not the whole story. There is more. Pesticides become air pollution in many ways. If the application is a powder or seed coat treatment, it can get airborne if applied during a high wind. This is called particle drift. Even if these particles settle, they can be picked up in the wind through erosion. Another way that pesticides become air pollution is if the application is a spray or liquid. This is called vapor drift and happens when applied at a distance from the target, such as from a crop dust or plane, or when the liquid evaporates off of the target. If we take a look at this simple graphic, it becomes clear how easy pesticides become airborne by understanding how they are applied and the machinery or mechanisms that are involved in the process. Pesticide drift has direct impact to humans, which can include genetic damage to cells, toxic shock, lung inflammation and internal bleeding, potential for fatalities in patients using anti-ulcer drugs, respiratory tract problems, eye and skin irritation, as well as some forms of cancer. Some unintended consequences begin when pesticides are used on initial application. In the United States, an estimated $1 billion worth of crops are destroyed because of excess pesticide contamination. If it is excessive in its application when it becomes airborne, what does that mean for people and the environment? Because pesticides are meant to kill organisms, when these chemicals move off the intended target through the air, they can still harm unintended, non-pest organisms. This can damage the ecosystem, particularly if a keystone species like pollinators or natural pest control organisms are affected. For example, in the US, losses of domesticated and wild bees from pesticide drift have an impact on crops of $218 million a year, largely relating to the pollination services bees provide naturally and through hive rentals. If many flowering plants are not pollinated, they will not produce the fruit that we eat. A type of pesticide that is more of a concern than others is called neonicotinoids, or neonics for short. Neonicotinoids are concerning because according to research conducted at the U of S, they are the most widely used classes of pesticides. In 2010, approximately 20,000 tons of active ingredient were used globally, which is about a third of all insecticide treatments. Neonics are classified by the Environmental Protection Agency in the US as both toxicity class 2 and class 3 agents. Because the neonics block a specific neuron pathway that is more abundant in insects than warm-blooded animals, these insecticides are more selectively toxic to insects. For example, the LD50 of two ingredients of neonics, clothianidin and thiamethoxam, in rat oral ingestion is greater than 5,000 mg per kilogram of body weight. The lethal dose 50 of clothianidin in birds and fish are considered practically non-toxic, and thiamethoxam is considered only slightly toxic in birds. The lethal dose of neonicotinoids to insects vary widely. However, the LD50 value for oral exposure to clothianidin is only 2.7 nanograms in honeybees. That is why when these pesticides become airborne and drift in the wind as pollution, only trace amounts are needed to devastate beehives long distances away. In addition to just trace amounts needed to kill honeybees, neonics are also systemic and accumulate in plant tissue, even pollen from flowering plants. In other words, pesticide drift containing neonics can settle on non-target flowering plants many kilometers away, become systemic, and kill bees when they ingest pollen or nectar for food. If the bee returns to the hive, others are contaminated. This drift can also settle onto hives or individual bees directly and kill through dermal contact. While pesticide drift containing neonics have not been shown to be directly harmful to humans, it is understandable to conclude that risks to honeybees are unrelated and do not affect human health. This, however, would be a wrong assumption that we will explore next. But first, we need to understand a little bit more about the honeybee and its role. In Canada, there are almost 700,000 hives that produce nearly 35 million kilograms of honey. Worldwide, there has been a 300% increase in crop production requiring bee pollination, and the value of crop pollination and honey production in Canada is an estimated $10 billion annually. According to a local Canadian honeybee advocate, honeybees are responsible for nearly 70% of all crop pollination and account for about a third of all the food humans consume, including dairy, beef, pork, and poultry. What this means for human health is that if this type of pesticide drift or air pollution continues, it will continue to adversely affect honeybees and dramatically affect our food crop production and food source. The irony is that pesticides meant to improve crop yield are actually contributing to a potential food crisis.